Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Warrington Wolves Rewired. Tonight we'll be chatting to a Rugby League icon, a player that represented amongst others Castleford Tigers, Cronulla Sharks, Melbourne Storm, but more importantly, Warrington Wolves. A grand final winner and Kiwi international, I'm delighted to say, please welcome Tawera Nikau. T, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic, Carl. Great, thanks. Yeah, been pretty tough times in New Zealand lately with the COVID, and I know Warrington's going through some tough times there too. And just wish best wishes to everybody over there, and hoping you guys are keeping safe. But yeah, no, fantastic in New Zealand. We've been COVID free until a couple of people from the UK infected our country a few days ago. So it's been great, but great being living back in New Zealand, and mate, still pretty passionate about the Warrington Wolves and watch as many games as I can when it's on Super League.
Super. Well, it's an absolute pleasure that you can join us. What are you doing with yourself these days, T?
Oh, Carl, I do a number of different things. I wear many different hats. One of the hats that I do have is I'm on the board for New Zealand Rugby League. I've been on there for the last 5 years. I'm also a selector for the New Zealand Kiwi side. So I still got my finger in the pie in terms of being involved in Rugby League. And also have a training company. So we do a lot of stuff around leadership, culture, teamwork. It's called Team One. Also do some building and developing here in New Zealand. And I sit on a couple of other boards. I sit on our tribal iwi board, Waikato Tainui. So yeah, my time's pretty busy, taken up with a whole lot of different things, Carl, as you can see. But still passionate about Rugby League. And, it's great to see the NRL back up and playing. And it's great to see some sport. But in New Zealand, we've had the rugby started back, and we've got community sports starting back in the next few weeks too. So keen to get out there and support all our local sporting.
Super. So the bakery's gone?
Yeah, bakery's gone, mate. I was eating too many pies. Got rid of the bakery. Kept on eating all those nice New Zealand Kiwi pies, not the pork pies or jelly pies you have like in England. These are, yeah, I used to have a bakery there for a while. Bit of an serial entrepreneur. Always got my finger in a few different pies. So the baking is gone. The bakery has gone, but do some building and developing along with some of the training stuff that I do.
Great stuff. So let's go back to your first UK club. You signed a short-term deal at Sheffield, actually signed by Gary Harrington, who is CEO coach at the time. Did you always have ambition to come and play in the UK?
Oh, mate, I used to get up and watch the Challenge Cup finals, watching the likes of Hull, Widnes, Wigan, Hull KR, all those great teams in the 80s. And it was always a dream of mine to actually go to the UK and play. It was something that I'd wanted to do for a very, very long time. And, touring with the Kiwis in 1989, and then the opportunity to come back and play a few matches. Gary came along and signed myself and Francis Leota. We both played for Sheffield in a bit of a short stint. And Gary, as you know, Carl, he's a bit of a wheeler and dealer. He's pretty good at, getting his way. Oh, Gary Hetherington, he's a great guy, Gary. And managed to sign me and Francis for a short stint, and it was fantastic. We came back to England, played with the likes of Mark Ashton, Daryl Powell, Sonny Nicol. Way back in those early days, just to name a couple of those guys. So it was a great initiation to English Rugby League. I left New Zealand, and I think it was just after Christmas. Arrived into because I was staying in Castleford. I stayed in Castleford. Arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning, and it was dark, and it was didn't get light. Then it was dark again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was dark the whole time. So arrived in the middle of winter, and it was coming from a summer to winter. I thought, what the hell have I done here?
Your next UK club is Rydale York. T, how does a New Zealand international, or I should say, how does York manage to sign a New Zealand international? York are a modest second division club at the time.
Yeah, no, good. Yeah, very interesting story. At the time, I was playing for Sheffield, and I was in a pub in Castleford at the Glass Helton, and there was a coach. I don't know if you probably know him, Carl, in terms of Gary Stevens.
Yeah.
Gary Stevens was drinking at the pub, and he comes over, sits down, puts up a pint, asks me what I'm drinking. Have a pint with John Smith. He said, yeah, Tawera Nikau. I said, yeah, Gary, yeah, nice to meet you. Here's a beer, lad. He said, what are you doing next year? I said, well, I've got to go back and play back in New Zealand. And I said, I haven't decided what I'm doing. He said, listen, come and have a chat. So Gary was very convincing. after about 5 pints, he pulled out the contract and I ended up signing it on the table that night. It's pretty good. He got me good. No, Gary was a great guy, and at the time I had to go back to New Zealand and play club football, and I was playing for the New Zealand side. And at the time, he said, "Listen, just come and see what York is. We're wanting to get to the first division." And I came back and played, and I really enjoyed my time. Once, I played for Sheffield, and then the following year, I signed on a short-term 6-month contract. But at the time, because I was looking to go to play in Australia, I'd been approached by a couple of Australian clubs to play in the NRL. But when I came and played for Sheffield, I really liked England. I liked the style of footy. I loved the crowds. It reminded me a lot of home in Huntly, because I grew up in Huntly, which is a coal mining town. It was a pit town. And I really enjoyed the atmosphere, really enjoyed the people, and I really enjoyed the football, So I thought, I'll come back and play second division. And then I was going to go back and play back in Australia after that. Yeah. But yeah, that's a story about Gary Stevens signing me at the pub.
Unbelievable. T, around this time, June 1990, you make your test debut for the Kiwis against GB. You're also asked to lead the haka on this occasion. What was that like?
Oh, mate, that's probably one of the most, I suppose, most memorable things for me was to actually play my first test matches. And one of the first test matches I ever played and to lead the New Zealand haka was an absolute honour. You only dream about those sort of things. So, we played against Great Britain in that series in 1990. Mal Reilly was the coach. They had a great bunch of English players, and they won that series against us. But it was a pretty tough, hard-fought series, and that's the first time I played against, Great Britain as a team. But it was a real privilege and honour. I hold it right up there with one of the best things I've ever done. You're representing your country, but to actually lead the haka at the same time was absolutely fantastic.
You practiced the haka in the team hotel or anything?
Yeah, no, most of the guys know the haka because we all come from different areas. Every area has a different haka, but the Kamate haka is everybody knew it. A few of the white guys didn't know, so they had to practice it, which they did. But most of the time, we did practice the haka, and if you didn't do it properly, you had to do it blindfolded. So there's some funny stories about doing that too.
Superb. You go on to make 19 appearances for New Zealand. Playing once for your country is an unbelievable achievement. But a player of your standing and profile and position in the game today, are you a bit disappointed you didn't manage to play more tests? Understandably, you made yourself unavailable for a number of those test matches.
Yeah, probably when you look back and when reflection, Carl, you probably sort of look at. But as you know, Carl, when you go through your career, there's a whole lot of different stages when you're young and you just want to get out there and play as much as you can. Then you go for this, as you grow older with your family, security, happiness. There's a whole lot of different things that happen as you progress through your career. So for me, it was around finding that balance. I had the opportunity and was chased by a few Aussie clubs, but I love, as I said, I love that opportunity to play. But in hindsight, yeah, probably could have played a few more test matches. But I think when I went out there and played, I just tried to play the best that I could.
So going back to club level, after 1 year with York, you remain in Yorkshire. But this time you moved to Cass. You're also chased by Leeds, Halifax and Bradford Northern, obviously now the Bulls. Why Castleford?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Carl. I suppose, as I said before, I grew up in a mining town, and Cass was a mining town. It was a pit town, very similar to where I grew up. And I went to see all the clubs, I'd go and have lunch with the CEOs and the coaches and sit down and have a chat. It was around, I'm a very spiritual person, I think, Carl. That's one of the things that sort of guided me on the journey that I've had through football and through life. And I think, going to Leeds, sitting down at Headingley, fantastic stadium, brilliant place, one of the best stadiums in the world, Headingley. Went to Bradford. Well, that was like a big hole in the ground, not too much there. And Halifax was on a hill. So I think Castleford, it was out of Cass and Leeds. And I eventually chose Castleford because of Darryl Vandervelde. Darryl was an Australian. I really liked Darryl. He explained the vision that he had for Cass and what he wanted to do, and he was pretty highly motivated and, someone that I sort of looked up to. So, and the feeling sitting in the stand, which still hasn't changed today. Cass is still the same ground. It's unbelievable. After all these years, it's still the same. So But it was that feeling that I had, and getting the opportunity to choose Castleford, augured really, really well because we had some great years at Cass.
You did have some great years. I mean, Regal Trophy, the Yorkshire Cup that you won whilst at Castleford. You did have some success whilst you was there.
Certainly was, and just a great bunch of guys. Lee Crooks was there, Mike Ford, Richie Blackmore, Tony Kemp. Cass had these ambitions and to get up and play with the likes of the Wiggins and the Leeds, but we were always classed as the underdogs, and I didn't mind the underdog tag.
Yeah. Your next stop at club level, T, was Cronulla Sharks, and this was in the midst of the Super League war, when rival leagues, Super League and ARL, and rival companies were battling to recruit the best players for their respective competition. And it's probably part of Rugby League folklore now that you hear the salaries going around at the time and the loyalty payments that were being dished out. You was in the middle of this. Was you fortunate enough to get some of those loyalty payments?
Oh, mate, I certainly was, Carl. I was very, 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 very fortunate to be part of that. And the great thing about that for me was around, being in the right place at the right time. And I couldn't believe, players' salaries quadrupled overnight. That's how, when you talk about the salaries and the incentives, the cash payments, I remember looking at my bank account a day after I'd signed in the Super League. I was still in England. I was still at Castleford because I'd signed an off-season contract to go and play at the Cronulla Sharks in 1995. But when I got there, they said, listen, we still want you to come back and play for the next 3 years for Super League, which was 96, 97, 98. And at the time, I said, well, I've got to go back to England and play at Cass because I still had another season to go on my contract. They said, listen, we'll pay you, but just come back the following year. So they paid me up front. I had a look at my bank account and I saw all these extra zeros. I thought, oh, no, that must be bloody wrong. But it was the truth. They'd actually put the money in, the loyalty payments went in the next day once I'd signed the contract. That was Shane Richardson. He'd come over from Australia. He was signing up as many players as he could. And, it was like, oh my God, this was crazy stuff. But it was fantastic, and to go back to during that time. And it was very surreal to see the game change. And when I got back to Australia the following season, Super League had been taken to court by the ARL. There was a massive battle. It was in the papers, the news. Murdoch versus, Packer was unbelievable. And, it was a real surreal time, but the players loved it because, they were having these two rival competitions and players were getting paid what they should have been, things that they'd never been paid before.
You mentioned the game change, team. What was the big differences? How did it change?
Well, I think one of the things in terms of that, when you looked at how the game was played and what Super League tried to do, which is similar to the Super League that you are now in England, they wanted to have a global sport in terms of that. And we had the World Club Challenge, which was absolutely fantastic because you had the best Australian clubs playing the best of the British clubs. And, that really changed the Super League looked to have a more of a global audience, something that, the sports are trying to do now. So that was 1997, nearly, how many years ago? Bloody, 13, 14 years ago. They were very visionary. Murdoch had this pay TV model that he wanted to put out and create more content. So, but it changed how we played the game. And it changed a lot different because, you went from, I was still playing the 5 meter rule here and it just changed during that time to 10 meters. So, the English game was, really stifled. It was too tight, but it opened it up and made the game more entertaining. That was the main thing that I really enjoyed about it, Carl.
Whilst at the Sharks, you make the grand final, going down disappointingly to the Brisbane Broncos, 26 points to 8. What do you remember about that game?
Yeah, it was a tough game. The Broncos with the Super League, we'd played 1997. The Cronulla Sharks, we had a fantastic side. Guys like David Peachy, Andrew Eddinghausen, Paul Green, Matty Rogers, was some outstanding young talent in that team. Richie Barnett, one of my other Kiwi mates, and Les Davidson, Danny Lee, Craig Greenhill. Thing about it is, Brisbane, it was the first time the crowd had, I think we played in front of 65,000. It must have been at ANZ Stadium. It was a massive crowd and way bigger than any of the other grand finals that they played in because, when they played the NRL grand final, I think it was like 30,000 at the Sydney Football Stadium where they had double the amount. So it was a start of having bigger crowds. Unfortunately, we've beaten Brisbane a couple of times during the year, but it got to the grand final and E.T. had a bit of a shocker that night. Steve Renoff scored, I think, a hat-trick in the grand final, sort of got around them. But, it was good to play in the grand final, albeit a Super League grand final. But, it was a great learning experience. I really loved my time at Cronulla. Great bunch of people, great bunch of guys, and a beautiful place. I don't know if you've ever been to Sydney, and been to the Shire.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place to live in. I lived right on the beach in Cronulla, right opposite the pub called Northies, and it was a great spot to live.
So you leave the Sharks and you decide to join a brand new franchise, the Melbourne Storm. A city that's dominated by the AFL. What was the appeal, T?
Oh, as I said earlier, one of the things that I've always been guided by is about the spiritual notion, Carl. I talked about, going to Castleford, coming back to Cronulla, going to Melbourne. And it was just a great opportunity. I'd been at Cronulla for 95, 96, 97. We played finals every year, played in the 95 finals, 96, and then 97 played in the grand final. And then I got a call. Actually, after the 97 season, after the Super League grand final, I was in Bali. I went to Bali with my family and wife and kids, and I was in the hotel, and the phone rings. I pick up the phone, and it's John Rebo, the CEO. And I'm thinking, he said, Tawera, I said, yeah, it's Reeves. He said, listen, we're putting together a new franchise, a new team down in Melbourne. We'd love you to be part of it. We've got a big expat Kiwi community living down in Melbourne. We want to get some great players on board that we can, get a good crowd base, get some really good supporters, and we think you'd be, one of our key signings. And I said to him, well, yeah, sounds really great, Reeves. And he said, well, when you get back from Bali, come down. We'll fly you and the family down and have a look around in Melbourne. And I said to him, who have you signed so far? And he said, oh, I've signed this guy called Marcus Bai. And I said, who the hell's Marcus Bai? I'd never heard of Marcus Bai. He was the only guy Marcus Bai was the first guy I signed to the Melbourne Storm. And I was thinking to myself, oh, yeah, I'm not going to go to Melbourne. They've only signed Marcus Bai. So a few weeks later, I got back home and went down to Melbourne, and Chris Anderson met me, and John Rebo and Chris Johnson. We sat down and they explained what Melbourne was all about, what they wanted to do in that city. And I thought, oh, man, this would be pretty cool to be part of a brand new franchise, a great opportunity. And at the time, they'd just signed Glenn Lazarus. Lazo had been signed from the Brisbane Broncos. And so Lazo and I were with only two international players at the time. I had a lot of young guys, Brett Kamali, Scotty Hill, young Matty Rua, Richard Swain. There's a whole lot of young guys that really hadn't played at the top level or played international or test football. And one of the key things that they explained to us is they wanted to create a dynasty, and they wanted some good leaders in the organisation, and they thought that Lazo and I would fit that bill really, really well. So, yeah, got sold on another story. Got signed up for the Storm for 98 season and the 99 season. Yeah.
Excellent. And just in your second year in existence, you reached the grand final against the Dragons, playing in front of a record crowd, incredibly, of 107,000. You go on and win that game, T. What was that like?
Oh, mate, that's probably, when you get to play at the top, the elites game in the NRL and get to play in grand finals. 1998, we played really well. We stayed in the top four for a new franchise all year, and we got beaten by the Brisbane Broncos one game from the grand final. So 1998, in our first year, we made the playoffs. We did really, really well. And, I thought, man, for a bunch of, a team that's just come together and a whole lot of young kids, I said, if we can keep this team together for another year or two, it'd be fantastic. And, 1999, the grand final, as you said, Carl, amazing feeling. I played at Wembley with Cass in the Challenge Cup final and lost to Wigan, but that's a fantastic feeling walking out onto the field. But, playing in front of 107,000 people at the Sydney Football Stadium, because they just built the stadium for the Olympics, and they had the big stands on the end. So it was a sellout. It was a sellout crowd that year. And just walking out onto the field, it was, Wembley makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But, walking out to the Sydney Football Stadium, the noise was just deafening, it was just so loud. Really you couldn't hear yourself, talking to the players. You had to use hand signals and stuff. It was an amazing feeling to walk out there on the field. But even an amazing feeling, I was walking off at half time. The score was 14 to St. George, Melbourne Storm 0. I thought, bloody hell, the game just went like this. And I remember walking in the tunnel at half time, walking up the tunnel, myself and Steve Kearney. And I was shaking my head because I thought, man, the first 40 minutes just went in the flash. And I grabbed Steve by the jersey and I said, Steve, let's go out there, mate. We just got to rip in and knock their heads off in the second half. And, we got a bit of momentum. We got a bit of rhythm with the ball. We got back to playing our game. And, all came down to the last 3 or 4 minutes when we got a penalty try.
Yeah.
Jamie Ainscoe knocking out Craig Smith, who was our goal kicker at the time.
Yeah, I remember it. And you almost won the Clive Churchill medal. Kamala just picked you to it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He did win it, but it doesn't really bother me. I was just so privileged and proud to win a grand final. A lot of the media talked about me winning it, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. And I was just really rapt that we'd won the grand final. When you start out in football, you have a few goals. And one of mine was to win a championship or premiership in each country, and I did that in New Zealand with the Otahuhu club. Did that with the Melbourne Storm, and hence part of my decision to return back to the UK to do that with Warrington. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier to her about your entrepreneurial spirit, and whilst at Melbourne, you showed signs of that. You installed the vending machines at the training ground. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, funny story, mate. It was unbelievable. It was unreal. One of my cousins was living in Melbourne, and he used to drive the trucks or Coca-Cola. Drop off all the machines and supply, fix all the machines up. And when I got to Melbourne, I rang him and I said, "Hey, cuz, what's happening?" He said, "Oh, not too much." I was asking what he was doing. And I said, "Hey, have you got any spare?" Because we used to train at the training venue, and there was no drinks, fizzy drinks, or just a bit of sugar or hip. And I said, "Hey, you got any spare machines?" He goes, "Yeah, we've got heaps in the yard." I said, "Oh, can you bring one down?" So he brought one down to the Melbourne Storm at our training ground. And we used to have a downstairs area where you had the food and the ping pong tables, the video games and all that sort of stuff. And I used to stick it up in the corridor, stuck it up there, and I had the keys to it. I used to, he used to drop me off 10 cases every week, and I'd load the machine up and stack it up, and the boys would go there and put their $2. I used to make about $400 a week out of the old Coke machine, but it was. But one of the other things I used to do, because being a Kiwi, and I had lots of family and relatives down in Melbourne, and a lot of the guys that came from interstate, so all around the country and stuff, they didn't have any friends or relatives down there. So I'd get all the tickets, for the games that we play at home. And I'd go down to the fish shop, give them a couple of tickets, go down to the grocery shop, give them a couple of tickets, go down to the meat shop, the butchers, give them a few tickets. So every week I used to get free groceries, free fish, free meat. For 2 years, I never bought groceries at all ever in Melbourne. I had to get them all on these free tickets. So
superb. Certainly a sign of things to come. T, so you win a grand final. You nearly win the Clive Churchill medal. You vaulted in the World 13. Why did Melbourne not re-sign you, or what happened?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. They wanted me to stay, Carl. John Rebo sat down because I said, "Listen, I just want to focus on the final series. I won't sign anything." Daryl had approached me before the grand final about coming back to England and playing. I said, "Oh, listen, Daryl, I just want to focus on this stuff." So after the grand final, we had our Mad Monday, and so a couple of days later, I met up with Reeves and the coach, Chris Anderson. And they said, "Listen, T, Lazo had retired. We want you to stay and be the captain of the Melbourne Storm. We want you to stay." I said, "Well," they said, "but we only wanted you to stay for another year." I said, "Well, I've been offered a couple of year contract over in the UK. If you made it 2 years, I'd stay." And it wasn't about money or anything, but they just sort of had a progression plan, succession plan around that. And had they offered me a 2-year deal, I probably would have stayed at Melbourne. But with Daryl's deal to come back to Warrington for a couple of years, and the other opportunity for that was to have a look at coaching after I finished in the UK, to get into coaching. So I thought that was the better factor. I mean, I love Melbourne, great city, great team, great bunch of people, and just real privilege and honour to be part of the Storm, that inaugural Storm team, and set a foundation and a culture that's gone on to probably be one of the best franchises over the last 20 years in Australian sporting history. So, the Storm are still hold a special part in my heart. When you win a grand final, you're mates for life. And so I still have a strong affiliation to Melbourne.
Who do you sell the vending machine business to?
Yeah, no, I got my cousin and I said, don't leave it there, mate. Better come and pick that machine up. But I think he left it there. Used to be a couple of guys, Ben Rorty and Russell Bowden. I think they might have just taken the vending machine over.
Brilliant. So obviously your next step is back over to the UK and over to Super League. I was reading to you, there's 3 clubs in for you. Ourselves, Leeds and Saints. Why Warrington?
Yeah, once again, I think it was just the vision, with Daryl van der Velde had come back and he'd gone back to Australia. And, when you watch the game, when you play the game and, Alfie, I think Alfie had just signed, Andrew G had just signed, and myself, and he talked about, I think, he still had some really good young players. Tawera Nikau was here, talked about Breezy, had a good crew of really good English-based players, but he was looking to lift the standard and have some other international players coming to the club too. So I thought, wow, there's a really great opportunity to play for a team. And when I was playing at Cass, I always, Warrington was one of the toughest teams to play all the time. They were always physically tough, mentally tough, and going there with Daryl and the players that he signed, I really thought there was a real great opportunity to go back and play and win a Challenge Cup final or win a championship, with Warrington. That's what really drove me to come back to play.
Yeah. So you mentioned yourself, Alan Langer, Andrew G signed for the club. Supporter expectations now been elevated. What was your first impressions of the team when you joined too?
Yeah, well, I think one of the, coming from the NRL, playing grand finals, coming back to Australia, I sort of I'd known a lot of the players previously from the couple of years that I'd spent at Castleford. I knew the area and the culture sort of thing in terms of that. But when I first got back there, there were some high expectations, not even for myself, but from the local players also. Daryl had some high expectations. So when I got back there, I thought, man, this is going to be pretty good. We've got a pretty handy roster. There were some good local lads in there. I think Mark Foz was still there. You had Alan Hunt was there. You had a good core group of English players with some good leadership and experience. That's what I was hoping that we could do is achieve. So when we got there, in those first few games, we started off okay. But as the season wore on, I just think it got a bit mentally tough for some of the younger players that were in the squad.
Yeah. Back end of the season, you're right, mid-season, our form's a bit patchy, but back end of the season,
Yeah.
I think we win 6 of the last 8 games. What do you recall about that first season?
Oh, man, I think it was a really great building season in terms of that. There was a good camaraderie being built within the squad, and some of the younger players there, plus the leadership players. But I think, when you look back on some of those times, there's some opportunities where we really didn't take those opportunities and nail out the games. We had some good leaders like Alfie, myself, but we didn't really have, a core group of players supporting us. So I think, and I think we got beaten, but we drew Bradford 2 years in a row in the Challenge Cup semi-final, two semi-finals, Had it been anyone else, we probably would have beaten them, to get to the, Challenge Cup those 2 years. So it was really frustrating for me that we didn't beat them. And they were the top team at the time, Bradford, and they'd won a couple of, championships, and they were going through their process of change. So, it was a bit disappointing in that first year, but I thought in the second year we could, improve and go a lot better.
Which player impressed you the most?
I suppose there was a number of different players coming to Warrington. I thought, through the middle we had some good young players. Paul Wood was one of the guys we talked about in terms of that. Breezy was another young guy at the time. Breezy was one of those guys and, had all the skill and the talent, but probably just lacked that professionalism in terms of working really hard. And he'd probably admit that to you now, Carl, in terms of, he had so many opportunities. And so, Breezy was one of those guys that impressed me. He just had some skill. It would have been great if he went to Australia just to get a bit of a hard edge to him. Do you know what I mean? And would have come back a whole lot better in terms of that. But, it was what it was in terms of that. I think Tawera Nikau, he was another player that I loved playing with Toa. He was a good centre playing for Warrington. Really good feet, gifted hands, really good step. And then we had the old Frenchman, Jerome Guisset. Yeah, old Jez. So he was another great guy too. Really tough, but probably if you knocked on his head, it'd be a hollow sound. He was pretty thick, old Jez, but he was a great bloke, great team man, pretty tough guy, and just do anything for you. And that's a great thing about a team. You've got to have a whole lot of different characters. You know what I mean? To gel and to do really, really well.
So we open up the 2001 season with a game away at Wigan. Well, I say game, it's more like an organised brawl. There's Tawera Nikau sent off, David Kidwell sin-binned, you get the red card late in the game. Do you remember this? Do you remember much from that game?
Yeah, no, it was a bit of a. I think it was. I think it was the first game of the season. It was a Thursday night, and we got billed, and then we got. Wigan were always a team to beat, mate. They were the champion side, and it was. I think they had. Was it Matty Johns was playing? Steve Renoff.
Yeah, that was Farrell.
Farrell. Yeah, it was. It was one of those games where we were right in it till half time, and then I think. A couple of things, a bit of red mist came down, and the game just evolved into a bloody brawl in the last 40-odd minutes. But as you said, Kidwell got sent off. Tawera Nikau did it. I think he head-eyed Steve Renoff 2 or 3 times, I think it was, in that match, and then he got sent off.
That was in the first set of 6.
Yeah, he got him a couple of times. So it was just one of those games where, it wasn't pretty football, but I think, and I think Danny Nutley played for us too. He was another tough player, old Nutters. But yeah, it was just one of those games to kick off the season. I just think the boys had trained really, really hard over the off season. We played in that match, and I think we ended up getting beaten quite convincingly. But the worst thing was we got, we all 3 players got sent off, and we ended up playing with 11 players. I think it was.
Yeah. New signing Kevin Walters leaves the club just after 4 games. Do you remember much about that time?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think Kevy had sort of came over on a bit of a promise, and I think it was very disappointing. It was very disappointing that you'd signed up. Kevy Walters, probably 6-time premiership winner, one of the represented Australia. Just to give us, Daryl had done some good work, and obviously the relationship that he had with Alfie was, been instrumental over the years. So, we were looking forward to having Kevy come and give us a bit of direction and a bit of leadership and steer the team around the park. And it was quite disappointing when he didn't even turn up to training. He just said, someone told us, I said, where's Kevy? He says, oh, he's on the plane. And he left. He didn't come back and say goodbye to us. He just got on his plane. I don't think, and the thing was that it wasn't that cold because, everyone was playing footy in the summer now. So I couldn't believe that he'd, just packed his bags and left.
Unbelievable. See, later in that year, rugby takes a backseat. In the same week that Lee Breeze loses his brother, you lose your wife in tragic circumstances. It must have been an unimaginable, difficult time for yourself and the kids at that period.
Oh, it certainly was, Carl. Probably one of the most harrowing thing I've ever had to deal with. Just so tragic. On top of the world. Won a NRL championship. Captain the Maoris in the World Cup. Playing football, doing what I loved. Beautiful wife, 2 lovely children. Everything that I planned in my life up till then had worked out. Had this been on top of the world, and then everything was taken away from me. It was just tragic, mate. It was. I hope nobody ever has to experience what I experienced. On that night, and later on, I didn't really know much about depression then, but from then on, it's sort of been a bit of a passion of mine, understanding what it was and finding out about that and supporting some of the causes. So, yeah, it was very, very tragic, Carl, and one of the toughest things. I was really lucky. I had a really good support network in Warrington. Had a lot of good Kiwis there, likes of Kevin Tamati, Tawera Nikau, David Kidwell. My cousin Marty Moana, came down and supported me. So, it was such a tragic event, and losing my wife to suicide was, just heartbreaking.
Incredibility and testament to your character. You actually come back and finish the season off at Warrington. How did you manage that?
Yeah, it was, mate. Letitia, my wife, she was also my manager right through my career. She'd looked after everything. We'd signed the contract to stay at Warrington for a couple of years, and I thought, I brought her body back to New Zealand. Was home for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and while I was sitting at home, I thought, oh, I can't just stay here. I've got to go back to England and finish off my contract and do the right thing, you know. And Letitia would have, admired me for that, but it was sort of to pay honour and respect to everything that she'd done in my life, and just to make sure that, I'd finished on my terms the way that I wanted to finish. And I was really lucky and very grateful to the club. They supported me through that, Carl. The fans were absolutely fantastic. The supporters were brilliant. And, I was away, I think, for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I came back to finish out the season. And, it was pretty tough when I got back home to Warrington, back there. But it was great because it was great for me and the children to have some closure. To me, to stay in the same house and, to move on past that. It was really, really tough, but, it's something that I had to do.
You say tough there, and see, when I ask the players that you played with during your time at Warrington, to a man, they say 2 things about you: great fella and a tough so and so. To a man, every single one of them. How does that make you feel?
Oh no, mate! It's it's just so heartwarming. You feel really good about that stuff, Carl. When you play footy, you play with your brothers, you play with your mates, and you want to, do the best that you can every time you step out onto that field. And that's something I've always prided myself on. And when you go and play footy, you want to, play with the player that everyone wants to play with. And I hopefully, just hearing that from the feedback from the Warrington guys, I really, really appreciate that. And it's something that I hold close to my heart in terms of that. So. And their support was absolutely fantastic. And when I got back to England, they rallied around myself and my children. So that was absolutely fantastic.
A couple of days ago, T, I was speaking to a former teammate of yours, Paul Wood, and he was telling me the story when you had to put him in check. Away in a training camp, Paul was he had a bit to drink. He was getting a little bit leery, probably getting out of hand a little bit, and you give him a slap to put him back in line. And actually, on reflection, he says, he was so appreciative of that. It made him consider and reflect on his own behaviour and to wind his neck in. Do you remember much about that?
Yeah, I do, Woody. We were away on a trip in Lanzarote, and we were all, and I think it was somebody's birthday. I can't remember. It might have been David Hyton's. Might have been David's birthday or one of the boys' birthdays. We're all dressed up in fancy dress. Anyway, Woody's having an arm wrestle. He's having an arm wrestle with one of the Spanish guys in the bar that we are. And I think he might have beat him and slammed his hand down on the table and then slapped the guy across the face. That's what he did. He slapped the guy. Next minute, the guy throws the table up. There's a big all-in brawl in the bar. And then one of the guys, Spud McCurry, Steve McCurry, gets smashed over the head with a stool and ends up with big stitches. And police come along and throw everyone in jail and stuff. But it all started from Woody. And I said to him, mate, and he was still a bit later on that night. I got him and I said, listen, all this has happened because of you. So I give him a couple of slaps across the face. I don't think you can do that now because of player welfare. Can't do that stuff, can you?
Yeah, you're right. It just shows the culture that you wanted to create. You probably didn't slap him enough, though, knowing Paul and his career. He probably needed a few more, T, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, he probably does. No, he's good. I see him with his podcast, mate. He's trying to promote a good image and, talking and sharing a lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah, he's a good dude. T, at the end of 2001 season, Warrington are desperate to keep you. They offer you a bumper contract. You don't want to go around again, no?
No, it was a great offer, Carl. I was very, very privileged and honoured. And, the back end of that season, the last couple of games, I used to love going to training and seeing all the boys and enjoying it and having a laugh. But it got to the stage where it was becoming a bit of a chore. And in a couple of the last games I played, I was sort of, hitting guys probably about, a minute after the ball had left and stuff like that. You got to the stage where, it was becoming a bit of a chore to go to training. I wasn't sort of enjoying football to what I used to do every day. And I thought, well, it's time to call it time. I would have loved to have stayed at Warrington and played on for another year and gone into some of the coaching stuff. But, after what had happened with my wife and my children, I thought, time to give back some time to them. So, I was really fortunate. I think the last game I ever played, Carl, was against Castleford.
Correct, at the Jungle.
at the Jungle, Warrington. So the my two most favourite clubs in England was Castleford and Warrington. And the last game I ever played was to play in front of the Castleford fans and the Warrington fans. And it was quite special because I had a pair of boots and I took them off and I threw one to the Warrington end and one to the Castleford end. So I threw my boots into the crowd. So that was a good way to finish it. And that's the last game of league that I ever played. So it was quite fitting in terms of that I got to play in front of those two fans that appreciated me, that had supported me whilst my time in the UK.
What's your abiding memory of your time at Warrington?
Oh, I just think the camaraderie, the crowds. When you used to stand there, the crowd used to be standing there, chanting your name, clapping for you, singing songs. I love that. I love that about England in terms of the players, but in terms of Warrington, at the far end, the cop end under the cover, just the way the fans used to sing and have those little chants. Hey, T, give us a wave, all those sort of songs. I love that stuff. But Warrington, I love Warrington. I love the crowd. I love the place. I love the people. And it's one of those things that and I'd love to come back, and I am coming back actually.
Yes, you are. You're looking forward to that. T, 2 years after leaving Warrington, tragedy strikes again. You lose your leg in a motorcycle accident. How did that occur?
Yeah, that's a good question, Carl. And so what actually happened is, I used to grow up. I grew up in New Zealand on a farm riding motorbikes, and I used to race motorbikes and ride motocross when I was a young kid. So when I retired, I moved back home to the family farm where I live now. I live in a little place called Huntly. It's about an hour south of Auckland on the State Highway 1. And I'd had my Harley Davidson. I've been up to Hamilton, had the bike serviced. It was in mint condition. Beautiful, beautiful Harley Davidson, done about 2,500 Ks. And I was going back home to my place, and I went down the road. The road turns into a left-hand turn. As I came around the corner doing about 80 on my motorcycle, a guy came around the corner. The guy actually cut the corner and he was coming straight towards me. So he was going to have a head-on with me, but I swerved, missed the front of the Land Rover. He was in a Land Rover, and then I dropped the bike on the left-hand side, and then I went down the side of it. When I turned the bike over, my right leg came up, and the guy had some bull bars that went around the back. So my right leg got hooked into the bull bar of the car going about 80 Ks the other way. So it picked me off the motorbike, spun me in the air, smashed all the side of my leg, bottom of my ankle and my foot. And I was in hospital for about 6 weeks, and the doctor was there, comes in after 6 weeks. He said, Mr. Nikau, listen, I've got some good news and some bad news. I said, well, what's the bad news, doc? He said, well, you might have to stay in hospital for another 12 to 18 months, and we're going to try and save your leg. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, we're going to take some bone off your hip, basically fuse it to the bottom of your heel to fuse the bone together. Then we'll take some bone off the other side of your hip, put that around the bottom of your ankle and your knee, give you a few bone grafts. Then we'll take the lat muscle off one side, graft that around the bottom of your heel. And we'll take the lat muscle off the other side of your back, graft that around your knee and tidy that all up. And then we still don't know whether or not you'll be able to use your leg again. I said, oh, that's not too bad, doc. I said, what's the good news? He said, well, the good news is if you cut it off, you'll be out of here in 3 weeks. I said, what? Yeah, Mr. Nikau, if you have the leg amputated just below the knee, you'll be out of here in 3 weeks. You'll be up and running in 6 to 7 weeks. I said, doc, I'm a rugby league player. That's all I've done with my life. He said, well, that's the good news and that's the bad news, Mr. Nikau. I'll see you later on. I'm going to go and do my rounds. So that's what happened. So a bit later, about half an hour later, I saw him walking past the door, and I said to him, doc, come in here. He goes, yes, Mr. Nikau, what can I do? I said, cut the bloody thing off. I want to get home and look after my kids. So he said, right, we'll cut it off tomorrow at 12 o'clock. I said, tomorrow? So, yeah, that's what happened, Carl. That was the leg, and the rest is history. So next day they cut it off, and then I was out of hospital in 2 weeks, and 3 weeks later I was up and running.
Incredible. On the way to the theatres, T, you see the surgeons preparing the equipment.
Oh, yeah, crazy story, that one, Carl. I was in the operating theatre, all ready to go, lying on the table, and I was scheduled for a 12 o'clock operation. So the nurses and the doctors, I could see them, they were all getting scrubbed and getting ready to come in. I was there all ready to go. The orderlies had put all the drips and monitors, everything was on me. I looked over to the left-hand side, and one of the technicians was getting all the tools and, the trolleys and everything ready. And I saw him grab this little 4-inch grinder. He plugged it in and went, zzz. Go, shit, I hope that's for the fella next door. That can't be for me. A few minutes later, he puts it down, and the nurses still hadn't come in because they usually put you under with the anaesthetic. And so I'm there, and the next minute I see him grab this big bone saw, plugs the saw and starts it up, and goes, shh, shh, shh. I go, holy shit, I grabbed the gas mask and true story, knocked myself out. No nurses or doctors in the operating theatre, mate. That's what happened.
Brilliant, brilliant. See, the hospital actually give you back part of your leg that you had amputated. What did you do with it?
Yeah, no, that's a good story. But no, here's what actually happened, Carl. Before I had my leg amputated, the doctor came in and he said to me, Mr. Nikau, can you sign this green form? I said, what's that for, Doc? He said, see those big pipes out there, those incinerators? When we cut your leg off, we're going to burn it in an incinerator. I said, Doc, have you heard of cultural sensitivity? And he says, what do you mean? I said, I'm Māori. In our culture, I'm going to take my leg home with me when I go. He goes, oh, no one's ever asked to do that before. I said, well, can you go and sort it out? So a few days later, he comes back. Actually, the day I left the hospital, which was about a week and a half later, comes back with the form. He gives me the green form and he says, oh, Mr. Nikau, when you leave the hospital, go down to the morgue, give them the form, they'll give you your leg. So I was in a wheelchair. I got in the wheelchair, went down to the morgue, got down there. There was a lady in the desk, gave her the form. She looks at the form. She looks at me. She goes out the back, comes back in a box about this big, puts it on the desk. She says to me, what are you going to do with your leg? I says, oh, I'm not too sure. I've just built a new house and I've got a bar in it. I'm going to put it in a big jar and leave it in the bar, like that, with formaldehyde. She goes, oh, that's a bit gory, isn't it? I said, well, it's my bloody leg. I can do whatever I want to do with it. So I was, later on that day, my mum drove me home and I hadn't seen my leg for a few days. So when I got home, took it out of the box, had a look at it. It was something out of a horror movie. It was like going green and black and had bolts and everything through. And I thought, oh, that's a bit gory. So I just wrapped it up in the bin liner and I threw it in the freezer in my garage in the shed. And about a month later, we had a barbecue at my house. True story. Good mate of mine, Shane, who's a butcher, comes in and was cooking the barbecue. And I said to him, oh, bro, can you go in the shed and grab that leg of pork on the top shelf? So he went in the garage. He threw it up in the air. But that's a true story. What happened with my leg, and I had it at home in the freezer for a little while.
Brilliant. Incredible. See, not long after, you get in the boxing ring with one leg and fight Tawera Nikau, the former St. Helens and Kiwi star. Not only that, you actually win.
Yeah, I did, mate. That was absolutely fantastic. I was really privileged. Tia's an old good mate of mine, and we had a few battles when he was playing at Saints, and I was at Cass and Warrington, and he's just one of those guys. It was a fight for life for suicide. It was a suicide event, and after losing my leg, it was about 8 months, I think. I trained for the boxing fight. It was a fantastic. I think we raised close on nearly $800,000 that night for suicide awareness, Carl. And so it was a fantastic event. And Tia was never going to win. He wasn't going to be the one-legged, former Warrington Castleford player.
Unbelievable. You've also run the New York Marathon. What was that like?
Oh, mate, that was absolutely fantastic. As part of the Achilles Foundation, it's a foundation that helps people with disabilities. And once again, around the suicide awareness and prevention, it was about raising awareness. And going to New York, I'd never done a marathon when I had 2 legs, and there I was going to do one with one bloody leg. It was pretty crazy. It was a fantastic event. I trained for it. It was something to keep me motivated and training for it, but it was really around taking people with disabilities. And I actually ran with somebody who had no legs during that race. Yeah, but they were double amputee. So it was absolutely fantastic. And I don't know if you've ever done a marathon, but if you ever go and do a marathon, Carl, I suggest you go and do the New York Marathon. It's the best marathon in the world. It's unbelievable. You go through the different 5 boroughs through New York, and everywhere, everybody comes out. They're clapping, they're cheering. There's bands, there's gospel singers. It's unbelievable. You'll never experience anything like it. It was great to go there, but the first year I think I did 5 hours 30. The second time, and I've been 3 times to the New Marathon. Every time I beat my time, so it's a bit of a challenge. But fantastic opportunity to go and do that. But even better with people who have disabilities, and nothing holds them back.
Brilliant. We're now seeing another Nikau make his impression on the UK game. Your son, Time, signed at North Wales Crusaders.
Yeah, well, he wanted to go. Well, he was playing a bit of rugby, bit of league in Australia, and now he's doing a bit of travelling, and he wanted to have a go at the bit of footy. So I said, well, I'd go to England and play, and he's staying in York at the moment with some really good friends of mine, Sue and Stefan over there, and he's really keen to have a bit of a crack over there and play a bit of rugby league. And I do feel sorry for him to some degree, because it's pretty hard to follow in your dad's footsteps and stuff for that. But he's a great kid. He plays outside back, centre winger, so he tells me he's a lot faster than me, but I'm sure I could run faster than him, even with one league. But he's a really good kid, and I'm really, really proud of him, what he's done in his life. And, I'm just so proud as a dad. You want to see your children, be successful in whatever they want to do. But I think, being a really good person and being liked by a lot of people is even more important too.
I can understand that too, with a father like yourself. And on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for chatting with us this evening, but also for your contribution to the Warrington Wolves timeline. No doubt you've inspired many throughout your career and continue to inspire so many today. Thanks, Steve. That was brilliant.
You're welcome, Carl. It's a real privilege and honour, and just want to send a big shout out to all the Warrington Wolves fans. Hope you get all your memberships to stay loyal to the Wolves. I know hopefully footy will be back for you guys in the Super League. And as I said before, Carl, I'm going to be up in the UK next year, probably in February, and then back for the World Cup. So I really look forward to catching up with everyone then, and probably having a couple of beers with everyone when I come up there. So I look forward to that. And once again, just hope you guys will all stay safe up there with the COVID and everything that's happening in Warrington. And I'll see you very soon.